All right, man, peace. So, brothers, there's a saying I'm sure that most of you have heard, that discretion is the better part of valor. What does that mean? All discretion is the ability to differentiate between when you should do something and when you shouldn't. And unfortunately, so-called black people in mass, not overall, but in mass, of course there are exceptions to every rule, but in mass, so-called black people tend to have an issue with discretion and the ability to differentiate between what they should do and what they shouldn't do, when they should do it and when they shouldn't. And there are a few reasons for that. The main reason is that our people are led by feminine energy, particularly the so-called quote-unquote black matriarchy. The liberal black female dominates not just the movements of so-called black people. Their nature, their energy is what tends to galvanize many of the weaker-minded, two-dimensional thinking males. And that leads to embarrassing displays of simplicity. And that's what we've had here in New York for the past few days over the shooting death of Mr. Saheed Vassel. For those of you who don't know, that's a brother who suffered from what is most likely a bevy of mental disorders. At the very least, he seems to be bipolar. And he was shot down by the cops a few days ago for brandishing a pipe that closely resembled a gun. At the very least, he was menacing many people on the streets of New York. He was running up on women with children. He was running up on other men, brandishing a pipe that appeared to be a gun and acting as if he was going to shoot them. So the cops approached him and shot him down, unfortunately for him. Unfortunately for him. Now, on the heels of the death of Mr. Stephon Clark, another so-called young black man who was killed by the cops and who also seemed to be doing things that were, at the very least, untoward, at the worst, criminal. So-called black people here in New York City, particularly in Brooklyn, New York, have decided that they're going to march allegedly in honor of Mr. Saheed Vassel. And it's just, I'm not going to say that it's humorous to me or hilarious to me. I would just say that the irony is really self-shaming. And that many of these so-called black people who lived in the neighborhood that Mr. Saheed Vassel lived in claimed that he was a nice guy, that he was harmless, allegedly. But what's glaring to me is that if the people there loved him so much, and if his mother loved him so much, you're going to see her in this feature, if she loved him as much as she claimed that she did, one would think that they would have gotten him some psychiatric help that would have aided him in avoiding getting shot down, because eventually when you have a mental issue of that severity, you're going to do something that's eventually going to precipitate your demise. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Tensions high in Brooklyn as protesters take to the streets one day after police pull the trigger, killing a man armed.
Now look at this shit. If you're walking down the street and a person runs up to you and does that, he's very fortunate, seeing that he's brandishing a fake gun or something that appears to be a gun. And I know that he has a psychological disorder, what the scriptures call a demon. He's very fortunate that somebody did not smack whatever that was in his hand away and stomp his ass out or kill him, because that easily could have happened. And casters from New York know that easily could have happened. This brother needed help, and whoever his so-called loved ones were, they were not there to help him, but they're going to be there now to try to garner attention for themselves, which is all too common in the so-called black community. They tend to only care about these low and disenfranchised so-called black men once they're dead. That's the irony that I'm talking about. And yes, like I stated, our people, they totally lack discretion. Why is that? Because they follow after the energy of the liberal black woman. And she does things strictly for attention. There's no disrespect to this brother here, Saheed Vassel. But what he did precipitated a very, very severe judgment. It's very unfortunate. But that is what happens when you do things like that. Now, there are other situations that would have been far more deserving of protests. Not that I'm even in favor of that form of actionizing. But if you are, I could think of other situations that were far more deserving of a quote-unquote protest, like what happened to Mr. Philando Castile. That was glaring. Situations like this unfortunately, these are things that happen when, number one, your family did not care for you to the degree that they should have. And number two, you do things to precipitate a very foul end for yourself.
With a metal pipe. Good evening. I'm Christine Johnson. Maurice is off tonight. Earlier today, the NYPD released surveillance video showing the moments right before the shooting. Saheed Vassel is seen making threatening motions at strangers walking by, including a small child.
You see that? I'm sorry, brothers, but that's not a tragedy. It's a very, very terrible and unfortunate incident that occurred for him. But I blame his family because they did not caretake for him properly. To have a person walking down the street doing what he was doing. In an earlier report that I saw for this story, there was a so-called black female who stated, oh, no, he was harmless. He would ask you if it was okay if he walked to church with you and if he could mow your lawn and all this. I said, look, and I stated this in part 3 in the series that I did on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas situation, the rise of Horus. In part 3, there was a psychologist who spoke, psychiatrist by the name of Lisa DeMore, and she stated unequivocally that people with mental disorders are harmless. No, they are not. No, they are not. They need help. And if they don't get help, things get exacerbated. They get worse progressively. Eventually, he would have gotten his hands on a real gun and he would have pulled the trigger on someone because he would have been in a state of delusion and he would have killed that person. It happens all the time. People who claim to be harmless because they just have the bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, they end up stabbing people to death because they're in their own world, or they end up raping a woman or kidnapping a child. It happens all the time. So once again, brothers, it's very important that the intelligentsia of the so-called black community are the ones who stipulate the actionizing of the so-called black community. That's why I always accentuate the need for you brothers to hold yourself to a higher standard and to prioritize logic and reason and rationale when you're deciding to choose a mate, when you're living your life. Because that is one of the ways that you can help to head these issues off at the pass, as opposed to being reactionary. So-called black people, they do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Why is that? It's because the leadership, quote unquote, of the so-called black community are not intelligent. They don't have any wherewithal. They care about what the scriptures call filthy lucre. They're only about money. They don't have any scope. They're not three-dimensional thinkers. They're not solution-based thinkers. And that's a major problem. And yes, I point the finger at the so-called black man because it is the so-called black man's responsibility to take control of an anarchic situation, a chaotic situation. There's no way in the world that you should be out there protesting over that nonsense. There's no disrespect to the brother, Saheed Vassel. But what he was doing was criminal. The real issue was that he was not in his right mind. His spirit was plagued by demons, clearly, and he needed help, and he wasn't getting any help.
CBS 2's Valerie Castro live now from the scene in Crown Heights with more on that and also how the community is reacting. Valerie?
Well, Christine, tonight the unrest can still be felt here at this intersection where those fatal gunshots rang out yesterday afternoon. Earlier this evening, several hundred people marched from this spot to the 71st Police Precinct in protest. Just within the last hour, several of them have made their way back to this intersection. You can see them there across the street, and NYPD is also here on scene. Although things seem relatively quiet for the moment, at least one arrest has been made.
Let me say this about the constant protests pertaining to the police. There's a few issues with the police that so-called black people don't understand. Number one, they think that the police are here to protect and serve. They're not here to protect and serve you. That's an ancillary duty that they have. Their real duty is to tax you. That's it. I've stated this numerous times on this channel. They're just garbage collectors for human beings. That's all they are. Right? Their main goal is to write citations and to arrest you because that is how they tax you. That's how they bring revenue back into the city. That is why they get evaluated based off of how many tickets they write out, how many citations they write out. It's not their job to love you or protect you. That's just a slogan. That's a catchphrase. But that's not really their job. They are a Saturnian organization. Okay? They're Saturnian. That's why they have to take a pledge when they go and they join that fraternal order. Number 3, when so-called black people talk about how they want the cops to either better the rapport between themselves and their community, or you'll see certain protests where so-called black people talk about they want to have the police department be eradicated. Well, first, our people have to show that we can police our own communities, which is what we should be doing anyway. We should be doing that anyway. The cops are not a major force in any other community other than the so-called black community. And that is because due to the lack of order that they inherently know our people have, that is where you will go to get your most arrests. Because whenever you have an environment that's filled with confusion, the people are going to commit the most crimes. Why do our people have so much confusion? Because we don't believe in each other. We don't count on each other. We don't have any type of decorum amongst each other. We don't have a code of conduct amongst each other. There's no respect. So that leads to criminality. That is why they come and they so-called harass black men, because they know that there's not a foundation of support for the so-called black man. So you can't talk about the eradication of the NYPD or any other police department when you know damn well that the first thing that's going to happen once crime rises in the so-called black community, the same liberal black women that talk about how the cops are afflicting the black community, they're going to be behind the microphone talking about where are the cops to help us with this crime. It's a circular conversation. This is why I go on and on about circular conversations, brothers. We have to start eradicating these circular conversations, these back and forth that are of no profit. Right? The racial discussions, the gender wars, these issues with the so-called police. Are the police racist? Absolutely. Are issues with police brutality the number one problem in the so-called black community? Absolutely not. It's probably 15th or 20th on the depth chart. There are major problems in the so-called black community. Police brutality is nowhere near number one. Nowhere near number one. But it's the most covered on TV. Why is that? Because the liberal media likes to play the so-called black community against law enforcement. Why is that? Because they want to eventually install a global police force. And that's what they're going to do once they break the American populace down to the grain, to the kernel like they want to, after they take your guns and things of that nature. Well, that's really what it's all about. You know, our people are not even considered truly debt slaves. Our people are just considered, just worker bees. That's why we're viewed as pure consumers, as useless eaters. They ferry most of these young so-called black men through the prison system so that they can maximize their earning potential, because you're not going to maximize your earning potential out here on the streets at a job because they don't want to hire you. Okay? And I suspect that that's one of the many issues that Mr. Saheed Vassel as well as Mr. Stephon Clark were having. Why is that? Because they most likely did not make the right decisions from 12, 13 years old. And that led to situations that may have marginalized their ability to be productive citizens at 20, 21, 22, 25, 27 years old. For the so-called black men, our future has to be plotted out for ourselves much, much earlier. You can't have a young black boy and say, I'm just going to throw him in the school system and everything's going to turn out all right. You have to be able to guide him all the way up, man. Because this society is not for us. This is not our rest. This is our captivity. And our people don't grasp that. They want to hold on to the so-called American dream. And that's why these repetitive situations keep happening. These things have been happening since I was a child, man.
They murder my son, and I want justice for him.
Lorna?
Give me a break. They murder my son and I want justice for him. Light on her there. Blood clot. Come on, man. Give me a break already. This stuff is ridiculous. This woman here was a failure to her son. She was supposed to get him to some type of psychiatric evaluation, get him some help to try to assist him in containing those demons that he had. Now she want to get behind a damn microphone, sound like Buju Banton.
Lorna Vassel made her voice heard during a rally Thursday held at the same corner where her son Saheed Vassel was gunned down Wednesday afternoon by NYPD officers.
Everyone that knows Saheed loves Saheed, and Saheed is a very good young man.
That's another issue. Our people, oftentimes, we live in a world of our own making. Your son may have been a good man, but what he was doing on camera was not good. What he was doing on camera was not good. And if you truly are an activist, if you're trying to do something that's going to improve the so-called black community, that has to occur every day in our decision making every day, not at a rally or at a protest seeking attention. And what you'll find at most of these protests and at these rallies is that at the forefront of these rallies are always women, and standing in the background are the men. The so-called black man has allowed himself to be marginalized. And as I've stated in another video, he is confederate in his own marginalization by exalting the woman over him. This is why these issues will not get solved. The woman by nature is not a problem solver, not on a macrocosmic level. She can solve problems in her house over the children and things of that nature. When we're talking about societal issues, no, she's not going to solve any problems. And so-called black men need to stop hiding behind a damn woman.
Following the rally, calls for justice.
If we don't get justice,
A crowd of several hundred marched from the intersection of Montgomery and Utica Avenue to the 71st Precinct.
Now, how many of those people do you think actually saw the footage of what he was doing? It's easy to say, how could you shoot him down like that? Imagine if you're a police officer and you receive a call that someone is brandishing a weapon, running down the street, pointing a gun at women and children. You don't know that it's fake. Nobody who was on the street knew that he had a fake weapon. And you pull up to that person. Now, of course, there is police protocol that they must adhere to. There's no doubt about that. And I'm sure that the minutia of what occurred when the police finally encountered Mr. Saheed Vassel is going to be the difference as to whether or not his mother gets a settlement or not, which is what she's truly concerned about. She's not concerned about her son's life. She's concerned about getting that settlement. If I be a betting man, and certain people might not like that, it's okay. I'm a deductive reasoner. I'm a deductive thinker. If you truly love your son as much as you acted like you did, he would have been getting some psychiatric help so that he would not have been in the street like that. And as I've stated already, from a previous video that I saw, there was a female who lived in that neighborhood who stated, without a doubt, that he would walk up to random people in the street. Everybody knew that he had mental issues, but according to her, he was quote unquote harmless. So-called black people, they love to talk about who was harmless after they're gone. It's not about who's harmless after they're gone. It's what are you doing to assist them while they're alive, since you supposedly love them so much. But we all know that, unfortunately, oftentimes in the so-called black community, the communication is so bad that people oftentimes may be scared to tell someone who needs help that they need help, or their relative that this person needs help, because they don't want to be put into the epicenter of an altercation.
Shutting down both lanes of traffic on Empire Boulevard. Earlier in the day, the NYPD released surveillance video
Now look at that shit, man. Come on.
They say shows the moments leading up to Vassel's death. Several cameras in the
Dude look like Tupac and Juice.
Cameras in the area capture him pointing a silver object at people, including an adult with a small child. His behavior prompted several calls to 911.
And deservedly so.
The whole station was pointing a gun at people.
This moment shows Vassel pointing what police believed was a gun in their direction. 4 officers fired 10 rounds at him. The medical examiner says 7 to 9 bullets pierced his body in the head, chest, and limbs.
Very, very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. And I'm sure that many so-called black people who consider themselves pro-black or who are activists, they'll say, well, how come the so-called white man could brandish a gun and he'll get shot in the leg? Or how come the so-called white man could brandish a gun, he could shoot a bunch of people, and like Dylan Roof in South Carolina, and they'll take him away without any type of bullets being exchanged or bullets being fired at him, and they killed this black man right here. This is not our rest. This is why my platform has always been so-called black people need their own They need their own police force. It's very, very simple. But that's too big and grandiose for our people because they have this dream of coming together with the so-called white man, number one. Number two, they don't trust the so-called black man in a position of leadership and administration. So that's why I state that the issues with the police are a problem. Yes, they're racist, but they're very, very low on the depth chart. The number one issue is the image of the so-called black man.
If they believe they were dealing with an immediate matter of life and death to the people in the surrounding area, that's an exceedingly difficult, tense, split-second decision that has to be made.
The firearm Vassel was believed to be carrying turned out to be this metal pipe. Community leaders are calling for action and demanding answers from the NYPD.
Now look at the top left. Look at that sign. It says, "End police murder of black women." That's really what most of these protests are leaning towards. They're even jealous of the black man getting shot by the cops. They're trying to commandeer the attention away from the black men that's getting shot by the cops to black women getting shot by the cops. And I've said this before, and a lot of people are not going to like this. But when you look at the cases of many so-called black women getting shot by the cops, it's not so much racism as it is oftentimes the so-called black woman thinks that she's going to talk to the cops the way that she talks to her ex-man or to her baby daddy. And the cops show her quickly that they're not going to have that. They're not going to tolerate that. It's very, very unfortunate. But that is usually the issue in the altercations between the so-called black woman and the cops. This situation right here is about his mental stability and the fact that he clearly was not getting the support that he needed from his mother up there, Buju Banton.
If we don't turn around and do something now, like the time is now, the energy is now.
Yeah, the energy is now. Did you hear that? In other words, we have to take advantage of what's going on in Sacramento with Stephon Clark and try to transfer it over here so that we can bring a lot of that chaos over here. Forget about the issues that are pervasive within the so-called black community that are far more important and are of a far higher priority than so-called police brutality, because this is our chance to get camera time.
Later in the evening, back at the corner where the shooting took place, police arrested this man for allegedly throwing...
Yeah, this guy, he looks like a real community leader. Looks like a real community leader, this guy.
Throwing eggs at passing MTA buses in protest.
Yeah, that's black male leadership. Let me throw eggs at a bus in protest. I can't sit down and say, this is what we need to do to take back our homes so that we don't have to trust, these non-black men to police our communities. It's let's throw eggs at the bus. Brothers, change starts within the home. That's it. It starts within the home. You could protest. You can get behind a microphone. You can get on a bullhorn. You can scream all day. It starts at home with you being a productive person.
The intersection remains a place of tension between the community and the NYPD. And tonight, some of the questions that still remain include whether or not those police officers verbally identified themselves to Vassel before they fired those shots, and whether or not they ever commanded him to drop what they believed was that weapon. Tonight, the NYPD has still not released the names of the officers involved. Reporting live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Valerie Castro, CBS 2 News.
Okay, so now this is going to be a follow-up to the story about Mr. Saheed Vassel and how he was killed by the police for brandishing what appeared to be a gun. Let's see what they have to say.
Learning more now about the deadly police shooting in Brooklyn. Police released what happened moments after the first officers arrived at the scene. CBS 2's Valerie Castro here with those details for us. Valerie?
Well, Christine, initially the NYPD said cops made a split decision to fire their weapons. Why 34-year-old Saheed Vassel made the decision to threaten people with a metal object, holding it like a gun, may never be known. But
we already know he needed mental help. The brother needed help. He wasn't getting any from his mother who got behind the microphone. That's all it's about. Once again, brothers, it all starts in the home. And a lot of times I get these, these internet revolutionaries, they come on and they talk about, you talk this stuff, but if the cops ever did something to you, how you know the cops never did anything to me, man? Or my brother or a family member or people in my circle. You have no idea what has been done. It's about what matters on a macrocosmic level. It's not just about what is affecting you emotionally. And that's the problem with the so-called black man. He does not have a ruling class mentality. And behind all that rhetoric, the internet revolutionary, all you niggas want is a hug. And I say that all the time because you're not fooling me, man. That's why you guys keep going back and forth with the cops. It's like you talk to your homeboy and supposedly he's not with his ex, but he keep talking about her. And you say to yourself, he keep talking about it because he still like the broad. You niggas keep going on and on about the cops and about equality because you want the white man to validate your existence. And you trying to cover for it with all this fake pro-black, melanin, all this bullshit that you niggas love to talk about so damn much. And you ain't fooling me with that shit, man. The bottom line is this. The so-called black man has to take back his rulership, take back his kingly mentality, and take back over his own life and his household. Bottom line. And then once that's back in order, then we can start talking about the cops and all that other shit. But I mean, come on. You're talking about how your roof is going to look. You haven't laid the foundation yet to your house.
But more surveillance video released today shows people seemingly frightened of him. This man is seen backing away with his hands up after Vassel appears to point the object at him. Others flinch, startled by his movements. Vassel's actions prompted 3 calls to 911, followed by a police response to Utica Avenue in Crown Heights.
One of the calls says it appears like he's trying to fire that gun at the people on the street.
The situation would turn deadly. Vassel was shot several times by 4 officers. The suspected gun he was holding turned out to be this metal pipe. The department now says after further investigation and reviewing surveillance video of the shooting that has not been released to the media, 5 to 10 seconds passed from the moment police arrived to when those gunshots rang out. And it says the verbal command to drop it was given 3 times in the moments before Vassel was shot.
Yeah, allegedly they gave the verbal command to drop it. Did they actually do that? Who knows? Once again, when you're dealing with someone like that, and then you combine that with a quote-unquote trigger-happy police force or a police force that might not know what they're dealing with, that's a recipe for disaster. But that goes back to what I stated initially. And I say this all the time to a lot of you brothers. And what I'm saying in this video, it may go over certain people's heads. It may get blocked out by your emotions. At the end of the day, emotions are not going to solve any issues at all. They're just not. And when we evaluate a story like this is about the fact that this brother never got the appropriate help early in his life. So when you don't get the appropriate help early in your life, by the time you get to where you're walking down the street brandishing a fake gun, it's going to be too late, man. It's going to be too late. So, I mean, it is what it is, man.
That's a lie. That's what I can say. They never say, drop your gun. Nobody never said that. Just a truth at it.
Many witnesses maintain cops fired without any warning.
They came out of the car. They didn't say no, drop your weapon. They didn't say no, police. They didn't say nothing. They came out of the car, and in less than 2 seconds, they start shooting.
Well, if that actually happened and that could be determined in a court of law or in some type of civil hearing, the mother's going to get a good payout from the city. And I'm sure that she'll take it happily.
Vassel was well known in his neighborhood. His parents say though he was bipolar, he was not violent.
That does not go together. Anyone who studies bipolar disorders or schizophrenia, you know that there's always a potential for violence. He's walking down the street with what appears to be a gun. If he ever got his hands on a real gun and was walking down the street in his own world, in his own delusion, who knows what could have eventually happened.
The city maintains officers reacted the best they could to a tough situation.
If they believe they were dealing with an immediate matter of life and death to the people in the surrounding...
Look at this shit, man. Like, come on.
...surrounding area, that's an exceedingly difficult, tense, split-second decision that has to be made.
As for that verbal drop-it command, the NYPD has not specifically said who stated it or who heard it. The New York State Attorney General...
Because they most likely didn't say shit. They probably just got out the whip, he had his gun out, and they said, you know what? We're just going to light this dude up. That's what happened. Because the person probably took a menacing stance and they shot his ass down. It's very unfortunate, but I'm sorry, a lot of people might not like this. That's not a tragedy. The tragedy is that his mother or his family did not take proper care of him to assist him. That's the real tragedy of the situation. The death was just a harsh judgment.
General's office says it had an initial meeting with Vassel's family earlier today as part of its investigation into his death. Christine?
Let me say this. As I stated to start this video, discretion is extremely important, brothers, if you want to be taken seriously And I'm not even talking about seriously by the other races. I'm talking about if you want to be taken seriously as a man, you have to understand discernment, the importance of discernment, prudence, and proper decision making. We're all going to make bad decisions in life. None of us are perfect. But when you show that you have a habit of making bad decisions, it is going to resonate in how people perceive you. That's the bottom line. We could point fingers all day and we could call everything police brutality, even when it's not. It's only going to dilute your message. Like when you were a child, your mother or your caretaker or your babysitter or your teacher may have read the story of the boy who cried wolf. Right? He kept crying wolf when there was no wolf. And then when there really was a wolf and he cried, nobody cared. This is why a lot of times our people are perceived as children. Our people are perceived as children because we're always looking to someone else to assist us in bad situations. What are we really saying? We're saying that we don't have the decision making to get ourselves to a level of productivity. And that's not the case. That's not true. The solution is within you. You don't have to go to the white man or to any other source in order to improve your life. Bottom line. And if you don't understand that, it's probably because you're not equipped to be a leader. So then maybe you should just fall back. It's okay. And when I say leader, I'm not talking about of a whole community. I'm talking about of yourself and of a family. But anyway, it's very unfortunate what happened with Mr. Saheed Vassel. Brother, stay vigilant. Peace.